It's such a lovely Saturday morning, and I am excited to be back on your screens with this edition of your most compelling news and current affairs talk show that's tailored to bringing China closer to you. We have a packed show today, so brace yourself for the very best of content in the next few minutes. My name is Makiza Latifa. Let's begin with China Currents with Chris. In this episode, we'll bring you stories on the visit of the Chief Executive Officer of NVIDIA to Beijing on April 17th. We'll also talk about China's launch of a nuclear cooperation with Saudi Arabia and China's development of the world's smallest terrestrial-aerial micro-robot. There's more coming up shortly, so stay with us.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. I'm Chris, and in this episode, NVIDIA CEO visited Beijing. China developed the world's smallest terrestrial-aerial micro-robot. China launches nuclear cooperation with Saudi Arabia. First, welcome to Beijing. On April 17th, the chief executive of American chip maker NVIDIA visited Beijing, days after the US issued fresh restrictions on sales of the only AI chip that it was still allowed to sell to China. China Central Television said Huang met with Ren Hongbin, the head of China Council for the Promotion of International Trade, where he said the hopes to continue to cooperate with China. The Guardian commented there was a surprise visit. However, a report from the Atlantic Council showed that the visit is not so surprising to industry insiders, as China is challenging the United States in a field of artificial intelligence through cooperation with the Global South. And NVIDIA, the world's largest supplier of AI training chips, cannot refuse to gain profit in this competition. First, advanced information and communication technologies such as 5G, which are led by China, are being used on an increasingly large scale in the Global South, which will be crucial in the future AI competition. The report points out that AI is fundamentally built on top of ICT technologies. AI models are trained using specialized servers with advanced computing capabilities. Governments and enterprises that want to deploy models tailored to certain use cases must fine-tune models on data stored in data centers. Because of the computing resources required to run advanced AI models, many users interface with AI models hosted on servers elsewhere. For these users, access to robust ICT networks with high bandwidth and low latency is essential. Governments interested in deploying AI-enabled technology may have also data security concerns, preferring to store and process sensitive data in-country. Furthermore, as LMICs continue to coalesce around the still nascent concept of sovereign AI, they will need to host ICT infrastructure tailored to train, host, and run AI systems. Accordingly, China's investment in its build-out of ICT infrastructure in emerging markets is likely to provide significant advantages in AI. Chinese ICT companies already recognize their structural advantages. Huawei has indicated that it sees AI as an enormous market opportunity in the Global South. The company has already integrated AI-enabled systems into existing ICT products, including the e-government services, smart city technologies, and cloud network offerings. ZTE is also incorporating AI systems into its offerings. In 2024, the company launched an all-in-one, out-of-the-box AI computing system that purports to minimize training and inference costs. Many countries have determined that the potential benefits of Chinese ICT and AI-enabled systems outweigh any potential security risks. More importantly, for many countries, there exist few alternatives to the AI systems provided by Chinese ICT companies. Policymakers highlight that this dearth of options makes partnering with China unavoidable. Mounting evidence suggests that China's global ICT advantage is already providing dividends for China's AI competitiveness in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Drawing from the Asia Strategic Policy Institute's Mapping China's Tech Giants dataset shows that China's AI activities beyond its own borders grew dramatically over the course of 2010s. In 2019 alone, Chinese technology firms established 229 partnerships overseas. Just under 360 of these AI-related projects were undertaken by Huawei and ZTE, accounting for nearly 40% of the total AI-related projects in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Middle East, demonstrating the continuity between ICT deployments and AI technologies. This data suggests that China's advantage in global ICT deployment may also promote competitive advantages for Chinese AI. Second, China's open source and accessible AI development direction is the future. The report highlights that China's top AI companies, including DeepSeek, Alibaba, and Baidu, have released open source models. Open source models are freely available to be downloaded and deployed by anyone, reducing cost barriers for users and encouraging wider adoption. As of April 2025, Chinese developed open models score higher than open source models developed by American and European companies in various performance metrics for measuring AI capabilities, such as AIME 2024 and SWE Bench Verified. Compared to expensive US models, open source and lightweight models are especially attractive for adoption in the Global South. Open models can be deployed on edge computing servers located closer to end users, whereas inference on closed models must be run on specific data centers controlled and managed by a model developer. For example, all of OpenAI servers are currently based in the United States, resulting in an increased latency for users based elsewhere. Lightweight models require fewer compute resources to run, enabling adoption in resource-constrained environments. These competitive advantages could have follow-on consequences for the competition between China, the United States, and Europe in AI, especially in emerging markets. Industry leaders, including Sam Altman, have cited the importance of the AI flywheel effect, in which the users of a certain model generate usage data that can be used to improve its capabilities, which consequently attract new users. This positive feedback loop can help to reinforce and lock in the advantage of certain AI models, absent other disruptions. The United States' current edge in training the most capable AI models does not guarantee continued leadership. Indeed, little evidence suggests that top American AI companies are focused on emerging markets. In contrast, Chinese companies with long-standing operation in LMICs like Huawei and ZTE have promulgated plans to expand their AI-enabled offerings worldwide. Obviously, American think tanks have realized the advantages that China and the Global South will jointly create in a future AI competition. Only more human users can generate smarter AI, and only smarter AI can create greater market demand, and will require the purchase of more GPU chips as a base. NVIDIA is not trying to please China deliberately, but for the long-term development of the company, it has to stand on the right side of history. If American AI companies are willing to cooperate more with the Global South to make their models more affordable, they may also be able to gain similar advantages. But as the darlings of Wall Street, can they do this? Perhaps Jensen Huang has already told us the answer. Moving on, a research team from Tsinghua University in China has developed the world's smallest and lightest untethered terrestrial-aerial micro-robot, capable of transforming into various shapes. This groundbreaking innovation is expected to revolutionize robotics, potentially replacing humans in performing tasks in complex and hazardous environments. Measuring just 9 centimeters in length and weighing only 25 grams, the micro-robot can seamlessly transit between land and air. With a top speed of 1.6 meters per second on the ground, it exhibits impressive versatility. The key to its adaptability lies in the newly developed thin film-shaped actuator, which enables the robot to morph continuously and lock into specific shapes, much like the transformer. This actuator serves as the heart of the micro-robot, offering controllable shape morphing capabilities. The research team used a Lego-inspired design strategy to create a micro-robot, which is made up of actuators, rotors, motors, control modules, and a lithium battery. The actuator allows the robot's rotors to transform into wheels while the robot lands on the ground, enabling it to walk, run, jump, fly, and climb as needed. This breakthrough addresses a critical challenge in robotics. Current small-scale actuators typically struggle to achieve continuous shape morphing and locking, which limits the miniaturization of untethered control of robots. The actuator itself is just a few millimeters in size, but can integrate components like sensors and motors, functioning as a morphable exoskeleton for the micro-robot. The new actuator's ability to deform into various shapes and lock into those forms is a significant leap in robotic technology, especially for small-scale untethered systems. The micro-robot's ability to perform tasks in complex environments opens up exciting possibilities for real-world applications. It could be used for equipment fault diagnosis, maintenance, and exploration in dangerous environments like geological sites or cultural relics. The miniature actuator also holds promise for use in bioelectronic devices, including implantable medical devices and haptic feedback systems for virtual reality and augmented reality. The research, which was published in Nature Machine Intelligence, presents a new direction in robotics, paving the way for compact, wirelessly controlled robots with versatile capabilities that can operate in challenging and hazardous conditions. Next up, on April 21st, China and Gulf Cooperation Council countries pledged to strengthen collaboration concerning the peaceful use of nuclear technology. Hosted by the China Atomic Energy Authority, the first China GCC Forum on Peaceful Use of Nuclear Technology brought together officials and nuclear experts from China, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and other GCC countries. The participants discussed opportunities, challenges, and collaborative solutions for nuclear energy and technology development, sharing insights on current needs and future prospects. According to the CAEA, China has in recent years enhanced collaboration with Gulf Arab states in terms of nuclear energy and nuclear technology applications. In the nuclear energy sector, China and the UAE signed an intergovernmental agreement on cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear energy, advancing partnerships in reactor operation, fuel supply, and personnel training. In the case of Saudi Arabia, joint efforts focusing on uranium thorium exploration, nuclear safety and public security. On nuclear technology front, China's radiation detection equipment has been widely exported to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, playing a key role in major events like the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022 and Dubai Expo. Meanwhile, Chinese firms and universities have partnered with Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain in the fields of nuclear medicine and basic research, the CAEA said. During the forum in Chengdu, the CAEA and the Saudi Arabian nuclear regulator signed a memorandum of understanding on cooperation in nuclear safety and security through joint initiatives, including training programs and working groups. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave them below. And see you next time.
And that's all for China Currents. Next up is my favorite part of the show, which talks about China's relations with Africa and the rest of the world. We'll hear from our global intellectuals who will share their knowledge and expertise with us on various subjects. Our first guest for the Thinkers Forum is Shiu Sin Por, the Executive Director of the New Paradigm Foundation, who was formerly the head of the Hong Kong government's central policy. His submission will touch on U.S. domestic politics, multipolarity, and matters alike. Stay with us.
A lot of people's reading of the situation or reading of Trump's behavior. Now, what they say that this guy is crazy, he's irrational, he's has no knowledge, didn't study, didn't read any books. Most of them are true, okay? But I think it's very dangerous to look at the Trump behavior at this level, because it's not just Trump, okay? He articulates his understanding of issues and situations quite consistent first, okay? You can say that his argument is bullshit, he lacks any theoretical basis, and he switch all the time. But the basic argument and the conclusion Trump expressed has been consistent. Now, the MAGA movement, okay, make America great again. I think people miss the main issue. This slogan actually admits implicitly that America is no longer great now, and they have to do something to be strong and great again. That's what we are facing. His policy, you can criticize him the way he calculate, how much tariff they're going to put on this country or that country, but it makes sense because all it comes out, it reflects the trade imbalance between U.S. and China, U.S. and Vietnam, U.S. and Europe, by and large, not exactly, okay? So it's irrelevant whether this formula has a theoretical or very strict academic basis or not. His policy of imposing this tariff on this country according to this formula, I think that's what he needs, okay? He needs some kind of standard to make this target. So my piece actually is arguing people who look at him, his personal character, his mental health, miss the point. And it's very dangerous to look at Trump's policy at that level. We have to look at Trump's policy, the fundamental elements that created Trump and created his policy. Now, Trump doesn't formulate this policy by himself, okay? He had a team. Whether this guy is legit or not is irrelevant. They have a whole scheme on how to deal with this trade situation. He has a whole scheme how to deal with geopolitics. America has to do something drastic. And the Biden administration or the Democrat obviously is not up to this, facing this situation. The issue, as the American side are dealing with, or Ray Dalio raised, they have two huge deficits which they cannot deal with. The trade deficit and the government deficit. And it's growing, and there's nobody wants to deal with it because the American politics is framed at every 4 years. So everybody's trying to deal with what's on the table, and they don't want to deal with the long-term problems. And that's the structure of the American political system. Everybody knows if we're going on like this, they're going to collapse. Okay? That's the problem they're facing. Of course, it's not just an American problem. It's a worldwide problem. Everybody has to face this problem, domestic problem of the USA. That's the situation. So don't just look at this as some crazy guy become the president of the US and is doing all this because he's an idiot. That's not the case. Trump is receding back to the Americas and strengthen it, and as a base to make America great again. It's the first time American leaders accept the reality of a multipolar world, okay? You can say the multipolar world is a reality, say, in the last 20 years, okay? But all the American leaders up to Trump refuse to recognize this. And they still try to maintain, as Blinken will say, a rule govern the international order. The rules are made by the Americans, arbitrated by the Americans, and they want to keep their position, even though they recognize a rising China, a strong Russia. But Trump is the first time say, no more. We don't want to mess around with Europe and other places where they are taking advantage of us because we are shouldering the burden without much benefits. So there's a huge change in the U.S.-European relationship. U.S. is not withdrawing from Europe. I don't think so. It's actually asking Europe to take up their responsibilities, and U.S. is no longer the godfather of Europe. A lot of people are saying what the U.S. doing is back to the Monroe Doctrine. Well, right. The Monroe Doctrine is America is Americans America, meaning America, North, Latin, and South America belongs to USA. Now Trump is back to this position again, but he's more than that. He'll get rid of outside elements in Latin America and South America. That means China, okay? Because we have a lot of activities in South America and Latin America. Doing the Panama Canal actually is not a national policy to run those ports. But that's the fact on the table. Second, he wants to strengthen this base by acquiring Greenland and Canada. So my feeling is that they're going to acquire Greenland, not buying it, but in the mold of Puerto Rico, become a Commonwealth, a part of America in terms of defense and foreign policy, and allow Greenland a high degree of autonomy, self-rule, and probably enjoy a lot of benefit. Like Puerto Rican can work in the U.S. He cannot vote, but he can travel between Puerto Rico and the U.S. He can work, take a job in the U.S. Anywhere you want. Enjoy a lot of benefit of American citizen, but you are not a citizen. They can easily do that, I think. Canada is a little more complicated, but the Greenland situation is much more viable because the basis is only 57,000 inhabitants, and most of them want independence. Okay, they want to get away from Denmark. That's the basis. But you cannot have a 57,000 population, real independent country. So you have to align with some power. The most likely and most beneficial power they can align with is the US, not Denmark or EU. So I think this can happen possibly in the next 4 years before Trump steps down, if he has to step down. And that's mainly because the US domestic politics. So this recognition of a multipolar world and the US only one of the polar changed the whole game. And Ukraine, you can see the change quite clearly. The focus, of course, is on China. Russia will be a player, but because of his limitation, this triangle of US, Russia, China will be the first tier of this multipolar world, with Europe, India, Brazil as a second tier polar. This is going to be a messy situation, a very dangerous situation. That's another issue I raised, that we have to face with this and see how this would affect and how our different policy has to be readjust to this new reality. As I understand it, China doesn't want to be the big boss, okay, or any boss, okay? When some people in the Kissinger Associate, the rumor suggests that China and America, meaning that US and China can pair up to be the manager of world affairs, China rejects this. Now, Trump also has a similar saying that, if we can get up together with China, we can solve a lot of problems in the world. The Chinese didn't take this up, okay? China doesn't want to be manager of world affairs. I think this position is being challenged by the reality now, okay? I think we should have a very deep discussion about our position on international relations and geopolitics. We stick straightly to UN principle of nation-to-nation relations, right? And we have a clear position of not making alliance with any other countries, particularly military alliance, no military alliance. We should have a very deep discussion on this position and how this position will face the new reality of the world, whether it's possible to continue or what kind of change it needs to be made to this. This is a huge issue that China, I think, is facing in this area. Continue our position, it sounds good and sounds nice, and it's really our position. But is it possible? First, I think the world would not look at China the way we look at ourselves, not just the US, okay? Any other country, as the second world, the third world, the developing world, our neighbors will not accept this, even though it sounds nice. Yeah. Even though China consistently proclaimed this policy, and you can hardly find our actions, any actions, are not consistent with these policies. But despite all these facts, countries all around the world will not believe in this because their experience in the last hundreds of years, this is not the reality. This is sad, but that's human history. So they would not accept this benign country is a good guy, didn't mess around with and any relationship will have are good for both sides, our narrative. And that's actually what we are doing, but that's not how other countries are seeing us, despite, whether they like us or they dislike us. That's, I think, the reality that Beijing has to deal with. Now, what's going to happen in the international financial activities? When the dominant reserve currency has a huge credibility problem and it's collapsing, what would happen? It will be a mess, okay? Because nobody wants to take up their position. The euro doesn't want to take up it. The Japanese are definitely out. The pound is out. So the Americans' view is the only RMB can replace US dollars. But they're very clear about this. We are not doing it. The RMB is not trying to replace the US dollars. Okay? But the objective situation may not allow this to continue. And that's happening, okay, with what Trump is doing. Even though I don't think he's up to facing this reality. The US view is that we are the dominant reserve currency. Chinese is a possible replacement, but they are not doing it, so we are safe. Okay, all this talk about the decline of US dollar is not supported by facts. They are still having 60% of the reserve, country reserve. Nobody's going to replace them, okay? They are not as big as the old time when they were 80%, okay? Now they're down to 60%, but they're still 60%. They're not down to 40%, 30%. So they're still the dominant. The RMB is only, 2%, 3% of international trade settlement. And we are facing what they call a Hindenburg trap, meaning the big power refuse to take up public responsibilities to manage the order. And then we have a collapse of an existing order. That's what we are facing now. Okay? The US like to keep their position, but they are increasingly difficult to keep it because of their own behaviors. And we, as a second biggest economy, actually it's the biggest by PPP, refuse to take up that responsibility. So you have a void. You're going to have a void in international finance and trade. And that's what Ray Dalio is talking about, that the existing situation cannot be sustained. And there's no viable replacement schemes or suggestions. And China is not going to take up this role. That's the situation we are facing.
So let's now move on to the next part of the Thinkers Forum, where the president and CEO of the George Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations, David Firestein, shares his thoughts on the U.S. government. He says that the approach the U.S. is taking is self-destructive and devastating for its economy. There's more.
I think that the approach that the United States is taking today is imbecilic, self-destructive, and really, again, devastating for our economy. It's going to have a number of different effects. Obviously, tariffs will drive up prices and contribute mightily to inflation. People are starting to feel that prices are going up. One of the dynamics that occurs in these types of situations is that people start hoarding things that they believe are going to see price increases as the tariffs really kick in. And that itself creates upward pressure on prices. Just the effort to hoard, the effort to try to beat the tariffs generates a kind of inflationary pressure unto itself. And then there's the tariffs themselves. And obviously, we've seen the stock market have massive swings over the last several business days. We lost $6 trillion in 2 days, gained some of it back, a fraction of it back, when Trump said that he would pause the tariffs, and then the markets continued to go down dramatically the day after that. I think we have lost several $trillion in the U.S. stock market value. That affects people in real ways. There are a lot of Americans who are retired who depend on their retirement savings to generate a stream of income. Those savings have taken a massive hit, and that is causing economic hardship as well. So, two things are happening. Prices are starting to go up, and people's means are starting to go down. The one other thing that is obviously being discussed is the impact on the U.S. bond market, which presumably is one of the reasons that President Trump decided to reverse course on his approach to tariffs just 13 hours after the tariffs went into place. That's the other thing. It's not just the substance of the policies that is horrible. It's almost as if a blindfolded monkey is throwing darts at the wall, that would be a better predictor of any particular action that this administration is taking on trade than any other way to predict it. We have tariffs. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. They're this percent. No, they're that percent. And that uncertainty itself creates a kind of paralysis within economic and commercial decision making. It becomes impossible for any CEO or board to look at a commercial situation and make judgments about major investments, long-term investments, business strategy, supply chains, when you literally don't know from 1 hour to the next when things are going to change, how they'll change. And that is debilitating and really obviously terrible for the economy generally. So it's the substance of the policies on the one hand, but the unpredictability and the lurching, erratic nature and mercurial nature of this president in terms of making decision A and then reversing it and then making decision B and reversing that. That is a recipe for stagnation. All of those things are happening, and there's literally not a single good thing that is coming out of this policy approach, but there are many bad things from the standpoint of the American people. And I think ultimately it's going to be up to the American people to weigh in on this issue and let the U.S. administration know what they want and what they don't want. The more anger and frankly outrage that is generated from these imbecilic and foolish policies in terms of the impact of these policies on the American people, the more likely that the Trump administration and President Trump himself are going to realize that this is not a winning recipe in terms of the MAGA. Most analysts that look at the 2024 election and Trump's victory in that election point to the fact that a lot of Americans were unhappy with the direction of the economy and were deeply concerned about inflation. So that was one of his key messages. He campaigned on the idea of lowering prices. He campaigned on the idea of generating higher stock market returns. And then, of course, President Trump comes in, wipes out the stock market, wipes out the global or international trading system, and makes things considerably more expensive than they were on January 19th before he took office. Now he's having to reconcile with the fact that the stock market has plummeted in stark and dramatic ways and is going to continue for some time, I think, on a downward and depressed trajectory. And so I think even by his own stated metrics, he is obviously beginning to understand perhaps that his policy approach is not achieving his own stated goals and that he could be held accountable for that by the electorate of the United States, including people within his base, his political base, his own supporters. So one of the things that I think was interesting that we saw in recent days is that a number of very conservative Republicans and MAGA Republicans in the United States Congress have staked out a very different position on tariffs than President Trump and actually said tariffs are taxes. They literally are federal taxes on importers and ultimately consumers indirectly, but certainly on importers directly. And conservative Republicans don't want to be labeled as the guys, the men and women that stood by and allowed the largest tax increase in effect in modern American history to occur without, staking out a position that they are not comfortable with that. So he's starting to see, President Trump is starting to see his political support within the MAGA Republican Party start to dissipate because people recognize this is horrible economics, but they recognize it's also really horrible politics as well, and it is going to exact a cost. This has not been well thought through, obviously, but again, it's a policy implemented by a president who wrongly and incorrectly believes that it's the foreigners that pay the tariffs. And I just heard the White House spokeswoman, Caroline Leavitt, just say within the last 24 hours, tariffs are not taxes. Tariffs are a way of raising income, hundreds of billions of dollars of income from foreign countries. It's categorically false. And yet those words are being articulated from the White House press room podium. It's exactly why these policies are not doing what President Trump wants them to do, because he fundamentally doesn't understand what he's talking about. And I think the feedback mechanism and the feedback loop in the United States will create a situation where ultimately the American people express their feelings about this, and elected politicians who want to stay in office are going to have to heed that and make some adjustments. And I think ultimately, the key point I would make is nothing that China can do, or really any foreign country can do, is going to affect what Trump does on tariffs. The only people who can affect the Trump administration's decision-making and President Trump's decision-making on tariffs are the American people. And I think we're going to start to see that play out as we go forward.
And wrapping up on the Thinkers Forum is Richard Wolff, who is the founder of Democracy at Work. Let's take a listen to his brilliant submissions.
I think here in the United States, it is widely understood that the level of debt is too high and is not sustainable. So it is definitely part of the calculus about what is to be done at this point. Now, it is not at all clear, not to me and not to many others, that Mr. Trump's tariff program is any way of dealing with this. The real issue here is lowering the rate of debt growth. In other words, reducing the deficits, which many conservative business groups and so on want. And they will now use what happened last Monday, the Japanese selling treasuries and so on, as a sign. Look what is happening. There are more and more holders of debt that are getting worried that the United States may approach a point where it is torn internally between the population that wants the government to use taxes to serve the people versus the government which needs to use taxes to service the debt. That kind of crisis can be very dangerous for creditors, which include the People's Republic of China as the second largest after Japan. And so there's a whole anxiety, and there the argument is that what is most important is the efforts of Elon Musk to fire large numbers of public employees, close down large programs of government spending in the hopes thereby of lowering the need for government borrowing. But even after you look at all of that, the bottom line is that the combination of firing those workers and the tariff uncertainty means that we are very close now to a serious economic recession. They may still avoid it, but at this point, Mark Zandi of Moody's publicly said, in his view, we are weeks away from an economic recession, which at this point in American history would be very, very dangerous. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, a British prime minister, a woman named Liz Truss, tried to advance Conservative Party program. She was part of the Conservative Party that would have sharply increased Britain's national debt. And the London bond market collapsed on her, and she was thrown out of office in a matter of days. She had to leave. The whole thing was a warning to the British that they had to find other, and they have been finding other ways. It is very bad news for the British working class because they have put into power the Labour Party to do the austerity to save the government's indebted problem. And that is why I'm wondering whether the whole firing of public employees here is an attempt to reduce the deficit. At the beginning of this year, in January, the projections of the deficit for the U.S. was almost $2 trillion. That would be dangerous. So they are now on a crash program to do that. But here's the last thing. It's important to understand that one of the reasons for the very large deficits and the rapidly growing debt now is because of what President Trump did in his first term as president. The tax cut of December 2017 expires this year. He must prevent that, he must extend that law, because if he does not, then at the end of this year, corporations and rich Americans will face a big tax cut as the levels of tax go back to pre-2017. That's his political base. That's his support. He would lose that support if he doesn't do that. But by continuing that tax cut, he creates the need for the deficit, which is too dangerous now. So he is caught in that dilemma, and that's what the tariffs and the attack on public employees, that's what that's designed to somehow fix. It's not at all clear yet whether it will be enough to do that. Well, here's the irony that people here in the United States just do not want to face, even though I suspect they understand somewhere. If the United States attacks virtually every other country, which is what these tariffs do, they make it hard, more difficult for every country, China, Vietnam, all of them, to export to the United States. Since the United States is one of the bigger, richer countries in the world, that damages the export industry right away. Okay, the United States is teaching every exporting business in Vietnam, in China, in Cambodia, in, Brazil, it doesn't matter, that the United States is not the secure export market you thought it was. You've expanded your business, you've hired more workers, you're taking chances as a investor, but now you realize that you took chances based on assuming you could sell into the American market, and Mr. Trump is teaching you, maybe you can, maybe you can't. If I were a business person, and I have advised them all my life, I would be the first one to say, you need to look elsewhere for secure export markets to compensate for what the United States is becoming a less secure export market. And then the United States has to face the fact that anybody looking to export somewhere else who can't get to the United States, sure, they will look at Europe for sure, but they will also look at China, because China is now rich enough of the Chinese people have some money to spend, that they become the beneficiary of those people alienated by the Trump tariff policy. So that in this way, the Trump tariff policy backfires. And I think you're going to see in the weeks ahead a slow recognition here in the United States that that's happening, and that's part of the larger. That's why I think the denial of a declining empire is fading slowly, but it is fading here.
And it's a wrap on today's edition of China Now. I hope you enjoyed the show as always, and you have been adequately informed and educated on happenings in China and elsewhere in the world. Please share with me any comments or suggestions you may have for the coming episodes of the show through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa, and I will see you same time next week. Enjoy the rest of our programs.